I'd heard about Affinity Designer for months now, even before it became a free tool. And now that the semester is done, I'm excited to test it out and see if it can really be a replacement for our OG flat sketching tool, Illustrator. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Mikkel Drew Pelham. I talk about digital fashion design software, technology, and communication. If you're a little overwhelmed by the business and technology roles in fashion and trying to seek a harmonious balance between creativity and profitability, you're in the right place. So make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. Now, I'll start off by saying that I still want to play around with Affinity a bit more and see what else it has to offer. But since I had limited time to test it this first go round, I wanted to see how Affinity's pen tool held up to its counterpart in Illustrator. And I mean, there's a lot more that we do in Illustrator, but 85% of the time we're flat sketching. So that's really the comparison that matters to me. So for this test, I used my regular t-shirt that I often start with in my beginner classes to sketch over. And let's see how this goes. Okay, first thing I notice is that the interface is clearly based on Illustrator. The layout is very similar, which is great. When I start using a new tool, I like to just start playing and see how much I can figure out intuitively. The fact that this is so similar to the user interface of Illustrator makes using this a little easier. I'm going to find my t-shirt template and hit OK to open it. Next thing I'm noticing is that the tools and the overall user interface, again, looks very similar to Illustrator. And I'm going to guess that a lot of the tools work similarly. So let's just see what we can figure out. The first thing I normally do is make the layer into a template, which automatically dims the image and locks the layer. I'm right mouse clicking on the layer, even the sub layers, but I don't see that option. So instead, I'm going to select the object and use the opacity slider to make the image lighter. Next, bring up rulers, Control R or Command R, same as Illustrator, and drag a guide to mark center front and then lock the layer. Now, I would normally create a new drawing layer at this point, but I couldn't figure out how to create a brand new layer separate from this one. The only thing I could find is new container layer, which is almost like creating a sub layer in Illustrator. But even though the layer is locked, I could still draw on it. So I'll go with it. Interestingly though, once I've created the outer perimeter of the T and now I want to go back and edit it, I have to unlock the layer in order for me to edit the shape with the white arrow. Editing in Affinity is interesting, and personally, I think it's probably a bit more intuitive than Illustrator. When you're editing a line in Illustrator, you usually click the line to see the direction handles that affect the shape of the curve. Here, you click on the point, which is something most of my students just automatically do when they're learning Illustrator. If you click the line, which is something I kept doing out of habit, you may end up adding a point. I'm going to finish adding the rest of my lines for the neck and the armhole. And as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that my shortcut to deselect also works here too, which is great. The next thing I want to do is add stitching. Normally, I'd select the hemline with the white arrow and copy paste in front. Then either drag or arrow up so that I have an exact duplicate of the shape of the hem that I can turn into a stitch and it runs parallel to the original line. Here in Affinity, it doesn't appear that you can copy a part of an object, not directly anyway. I read something that suggested copying the object and then cutting it apart and deleting away the extra stuff, but that seems like a lot more work than just redrawing the line. So I'm just going to redraw it. My first instinct is to draw it right on the T sleeve where it should be placed, but of course it's not very parallel to the shape of the hem. So instead, I'm going to trace right over the hem and then move it. And that should give me a more parallel line. Change to a thinner stroke, change to a dashed line, and adjust the dash and gap, all similar to Illustrator. And then I'll drag a copy of the line to create the second row of stitching. Repeat the process for the bottom hem stitching, and now it's time to reflect. There are kind of reflection symmetry tools in Affinity, but I haven't really found a reflect tool like Illustrator's where you can set the point of reflection and then create a copy as you reflect. But there is a transform tool. There's just a couple of extra steps to reflect and get your full sketch. First thing to do is to select all of the lines you've drawn, then copy and paste them. Note that Affinity pastes the object right on top of what was copied. So make sure you don't keep hitting paste or Control V because you don't see it in the middle of the page like you would with Illustrator. It's there. Next, keeping the object selected, choose Transform, Flip Horizontal. Unlike how we do it in Illustrator, where we can set the point of reflection so it flips to the opposite side of the center front guide, here it flips in place. So now you'll need to drag it to where it should be. Be sure to hold the Shift key so that it stays aligned with the opposite side of the garment and move it into place. It was really nice to see a shape builder tool here in Affinity, so that's what I'm going to use now to create the closed shapes. The one thing it's missing though is that option in Illustrator for gap detection. So what I found when I was using this is that I was having the same issue I used to have when I used the Divide Pathfinder, which is that if the lines aren't touching, it doesn't close the shape. So I had to zoom in closely to make sure the armhole and neck seam lines were actually touching the outer perimeter, even slightly crossing the edges before I used the shape builder. Something interesting about this shape builder tool is that it automatically fills it with color, which I think could be helpful. It's an automatic alert that you did indeed create a shape. Next, send the shapes to the back so that your stitching appears in front of it, and then select the closed shapes to fill them with color. And here's an advantage that no longer exists in Illustrator: Pantone colors. And like Illustrator, you have that tint slider in the color palette so you can make areas a lighter shade of the existing color. Lastly, select everything and group. So, my thoughts. It's really not bad. I'm not mad at Affinity. Is it enough to move me away from Illustrator? I doubt it. There's a little bit of a delay seeing your lines when you draw with the pen tool. The Bezier curve doesn't feel quite as smooth as Illustrator. But my two biggest issues are, one, the fact that I can't select a part of a line, at least not as simply as I do it in Illustrator, is big, because that's how many of us do stitching. We're not constantly redrawing, and not having that option would definitely slow me down. The other issue is not having gap detection with the shape builder. If you saw this video, which was one of my first talking about shape builder, I mentioned then how helpful that option is when you're drawing. It keeps you from having to take a microscope to your sketches, making sure every vector actually touches each other. So, like I said, this was me giving it a quick and dirty test of the most important tool for all of us as fashion designers. I don't plan to switch anytime soon, but I will say it's a decent alternative, at least for flat sketching. The caveat here is that there's so much more that fashion designers or those adjacent to us, like the textile designers, graphic designers, TDs, use it for. And it doesn't seem to rise to meet those needs. Again, I haven't done a deep dive, but I don't know, y'all. The other thing is that if you're working in the industry or you want to get a job working for a fashion company, they won't be using Affinity. That may change, but I can almost guarantee that if it does, it won't be anytime soon. So for me, I'll be sticking with Illustrator. And if you need to learn to use a vector-based program, create your flat sketches, technical drawings, create prints or graphics, and a whole host of other things that a designer can do with a vector-based software, which I talk about in this video, I would definitely suggest using Illustrator. And if you're new to Illustrator for fashion design and need some guidance in how to use it, make sure you check out my course, which I'll link to in the description. Thanks for watching today's video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video with another designer if you found it helpful. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you next time.